Welcome to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast, a place for working Muslim women to share their stories, struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way in pursuit of their careers. I'm Dr. Kali Hussein.
And I'm Dr. Hani Ahmed. And in this podcast, we bring inspirational, trailblazing, successful, and fulfilled professional Muslim women to you.
Get ready to be inspired and learn how you can forge your own path as well.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Professional Muslim Women Podcast. And it is Kali and myself, Hani here. Hello.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. All right, Kali. Today we have a very interesting but relevant subject to talk about, don't we?
Yes, we do. So we're going to be talking about an experience I recently had at a conference and Hani had in another setting. And so we will be touching on many relevant topics, especially with the new interest in diversity and inclusion in many settings and women's empowerment. We are going to talk about something that is not covered as well, and that is intersectionality. So intersectionality, I'm sure many of you guys know, is basically the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So that's the dictionary definition.
Yes.
But basically it's being, belonging to multiple groups and facing the marginalizing aspect of all those different groups.
Yeah, pretty heavy subject. Interesting, but also heavy. So to just forewarn everybody. But yeah, so you're talking about this phenomenon of any individual or any group of people falling into multiple buckets of, categories, right? Whether it's women, a women bucket, right, versus their male counterparts, or the experiences of ethnic minorities or experiences of religious minority, being all of those things. How do they overlap? How do they interplay? And what does that mean for the individuals who are in one or multiple buckets?
Right. And we'll also talk about this in terms of the biases we perceive. So there's explicit bias where, there is someone knows that they're biased against you, or they have preferences and they are fully aware of it and they discriminate knowingly, versus implicit bias, which is an unconscious bias where people have preferences, but they are not very aware of it. I think one of the sayings is, people hire others who look like them. So if you have, someone in that position and they have multiple people that they're looking at, they're more likely to hire someone who looks like them, who has the same interests or background as they have. And that's a subconscious level of implicit bias. And there are a lot of studies looking at implicit bias nowadays.
There's a huge interest in that, in implicit bias, and across multiple fields, and definitely in medicine, right? Because the literature is very clear that there is adverse outcomes for minorities, right? And in health, in every possible category that you can think of. And the reason why implicit bias is of such interest is because it is involved. And implicit bias, mind you, is different from explicit in that this is not, your doctor or someone with some sort of authority over you. I'm using doctor because we're in healthcare, but, thinks badly of you or wants a bad outcome for you. It's
right.
It's almost a subconscious process where there is bias that leads to poor outcomes, but that person isn't even aware that they're biased. And that factors into why there is a disparity in outcomes. And so this is why it's such an important subject and directly relevant to us.
Yeah, and to give you a really good example of implicit bias when it comes to healthcare is there's a case study where you have, I think they tested many health physicians on this. They had a white male, a black male, a white woman, and a black woman, right? And all present with the same exact symptoms. I think same age, same past medical history, and they all presented with chest pain.
Right.
And chest pain, usually, when we are evaluating these patients, we want to make sure they don't have a heart attack, right? And so I think across all physicians, they were more likely to urgently treat for a heart attack the men more than the women. And the white patients more than the Black patients.
Right.
So the person who had the least intervention and who had delayed intervention and identification of the fact that she was having a heart attack was a Black woman.
Yeah. I mean,
right? She was a woman and she was Black. So that's where her intersectionality was basically created an implicit bias where she received worse care.
Right. Of everyone else. Exactly. Yep. Because of the way that, all the biases intersected and what it meant for her, in this case, in terms of getting good care compared to the other cohorts. So, yeah. All right. So, Kali, tell me, you've recently had an experience that had us kind of start thinking about this. And, we're both conscious that there is a huge movement right now towards in diversity and empowerment. And we started to talk about this because of a situation you found yourself in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I've been to a lot of women in medicine conferences and meetings and women's empowerment conferences, and I've even spoken at a few. And I've started to notice a trend, but this particular one basically took it to a whole new level. When I speak up and when I write about certain experiences, I talk about a lot of the experiences that I went through that still need a fix, that people are still, experiencing to this day. So we talked a lot about implicit bias, and there were multiple presentations on implicit bias, and most of it was in academia, right? So women in academic medicine, how are they getting promoted? Who's holding chair positions? How fast are they getting promoted? Who's getting published? Who's getting awards and things like that? And so when, the presentation was over, I had a nagging question, and I always ask this question of there is a huge interest in implicit bias. But one of the main things that I see specifically in medicine, but it's in many, many other fields. I mean, we recently conducted a survey that showed us that it's in every field, not just medicine, but there is persistent explicit bias. Right? Yeah. There is persistent conscious discrimination, especially for minorities, marginalized people. And it comes in multiple forms, whether it's racial discrimination, whether it's gender discrimination, whether it's pregnancy discrimination, which, I've seen a lot of. And so I have young mentees who reach out to me and ask me what to do about certain situations where they're being put on the spot and their rights are being violated in the middle of interviews where they're being asked about their marital status and their plans to have a family.
Right.
Or a Muslim woman who wears a hijab is being questioned about her practice of the hijab and whether she can take it off or not if she wants a job. Right? Those are,
which are all illegal.
which are all illegal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it happens in medicine so much. And I've talked about it so much in how, I've dealt with it and I've gone through it and whatnot. And now I'm trying to find constructive ways of how do we address this. And I go to these, women in medicine summits where I feel like it's a woman specific issue. Right. Pregnancy discrimination is woman specific. Wearing, the way we dress as Muslim women, it's woman specific.
Absolutely.
And so when I brought up the question, and I talked about my experience and the fact that it is happening right now, and I find myself in a position where I am not equipped to provide good guidance for these women because, they can do all they can on their end, but speaking up against these things in, the hierarchical fields that we're in, it's more punitive to the complainer, right? So
the system is the issue.
The system is the issue. And my question was, how do we address this system? And the fact that, first of all, my question was cut off. And then the response that I got was basically, this is beyond the scope of this meeting, and that it's something that needs to be taken up with each institution and with leadership. And when it comes to, the explicit bias, that now, we're getting into legal issues and, that's something that you're going to have to talk to somebody else about.
Wow.
Yeah. And it seemed to me that things that affect women that have a lot of intersectionality, it's not a priority when it comes to true diversity and inclusion, right? And I got the sense that it's people of privilege who are basically framing the conversation and framing where the movement goes.
Yeah, I hear you. you have stake in their goals, right? You have a stake in it, but they don't necessarily have a stake in your goals. And so you are, at a event where you're there to promote diversity. The event is created for ostensibly someone like you to promote diversity, get, the diverse voices out there, and you're feeling left out even there. That's wrong. Of course, it definitely has to do with intersectionality. And, it's funny, Khali, when you told me this, it made me think of, historically, the women's movement in the US, like women suffragette movement, where women as a whole, they were fighting for the right to vote, right? I think this was in the 1920s or 1930s. But a well-documented aspect of that was that Black women were excluded, and they were excluded by the women's suffragette movement because they were felt to be a liability to their cause. There wasn't room for them. That's basically what they came out and said at that.
Right. And that's exactly what it seemed like. It was basically, wait for your turn. We're working on something else right now. Wait for your turn. And I had this analogy in my head. I can't get it out. Basically, the way I saw this whole thing is we have this ladder that has multiple rungs at the bottom, which are completely broken. But we have people at the very top, chipping away at this glass ceiling while completely not paying attention to fixing the broken ladder. Right. There are women who are, really, really struggling to basically make it on the ladder. And I think of all the spaces where I felt like I was pushed out of or told like I didn't belong to. And there are rungs on this ladder that are completely broken that need to be fixed. But, we're at the top of this ladder and we're chipping away at that glass ceiling without stabilizing the ladder and making sure that it's on a good foundation.
Right. That's exactly right. Speaking of precedents, like sort of related is even like the Black civil rights movement historically in the US. When you think about Martin Luther King Jr., he was much more of a activist than people give him credit for. And he's written a lot about how his supporters kind of held him back, and they said, you're demanding too much, you're moving too fast, you're asking for too much, you need to stay in your lane and back off. And it's almost like history is repeating itself, where your supporters, and this is what he had described, and I think there's like a famous quote about this, but I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's almost like your supporter who's pulling you down and saying, wait, it's not your turn, wait for your turn. That is worse than your enemy, who is explicitly standing in front of you. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I kind of came out of the meeting. Usually I leave the previous meetings I've been to, I come out of it, very inspired and motivated and, finding new ways of tackling, obstacles and whatnot, finding new ways to mentor the young women that I do mentor. Coming out of this meeting, it was just so unsettling to just say, we basically have to hold off and there's no set goal, right?
Yeah.
There's no set goal of wait until this is accomplished, right? We're fighting the pay gap. We're fighting, promotion to higher levels. And we're basically told that within medicine, when more women come in, they'll make it better for other women. Well, the medical school graduation who makes up med schools is 50% women. We've gotten to a point where it's 50-50, but, we're still not seeing that translate into higher positions. But who's to guarantee that if you do get to that position, that everybody else's issues are going to be brought, like the intersectionality, the underrepresented minorities in medicine they're going to become a primary issue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And it's not just Black women. I mean, it's people of color from multiple backgrounds, LGBTQ folks, it's Native Americans. It's a whole host of people. And I left that meeting just basically feeling like who else's voice isn't being heard? Like what other voices are missing in that room? It just made me feel like the whole diversity and inclusion that we constantly talk about is nothing more than lip service.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? And the way I've always felt that I had to deal with these issues is, looking at, for example, rare diseases, right? Rare diseases that, we hardly see. Who are the people that are spearheading research into those programs? It's the family members, right? It's the people who are directly affected by it.
Yes.
Right. And so with these issues, unless there are people who are directly affected by it, there is no reason for anybody to take it up.
Yeah.
Right. And so I kind of left there saying, okay, well, obviously there no more work needs to be done, but we kind of have to be our own champions to voice these concerns because, yeah, I dealt with it my own way and I came out, better for it at the end. But there are young women right now who are going through these things that I've gone through in medicine. How many other women are going through it in other fields?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
You nailed it. I mean, the solution has to come from us who are affected. Let me tell you one experience that I had that highlighted this disparity for me. I worked at one point a sort of a smaller community hospital. It's not my current place of work, but I definitely noticed. I noticed that there was a difference in the way that I was treated as a physician of color. When you compared me to my counterparts who were male, were white males and black males, you could see the intersectionality of it. And what I noticed is that if I've ever came across, something that was very clearly, explicitly, maybe implicitly biased, that was the source of whatever conflict had occurred, that there really wasn't an understanding except from other women of color. That was the only camp from which I had complete understanding and I had complete support. And I also noticed that our experiences in intersectionality are similar. Mm-hmm. They get replicated
and validated.
And right. Validated by each other because we're all, dealing with it. The Good. Issue is that we really have to take these diversity and empowerment movements with a grain of salt. Who's in there? What are they advocating for? Is there a seat for me at the table? Or am I, oftentimes we come away and we think we're battling this alone. The things that I dealt with at this particular place of work that I was at, I went about and, I was alone in the process of rectifying whatever disrespect that came my way or whatever. And I really felt like I was alone in it because of that lack of understanding from my cohorts. Of course, physicians who were female, they fully understood with me there's a very clearly well-known phenomenon of sexism, I think, in medicine. I think that's the right word, right? So there's a clear difference. Misogyny, yep, in the way that, male physicians are traditionally portrayed. And then, a women physician are treated differently. It's a well-known thing. But then it goes a step further when you're a physician of color, a person of color. And so I felt I was in it alone. What I'm realizing now is that we're not alone in this. And the solution, I can't wait for everyone else to understand what I'm going through. I need to join my peers and we need to make our own movement. We need to sit down at the table.
That's what it came down to. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad we created this platform, because not many people are willing to share this story or to highlight these stories.
Yeah.
We think we've dealt with explicit bias. We think, everybody is ethical and does the right thing at all times. And when I tell a tenth of, some of the things that I've gone through and things that were said to me in interviews, everybody gasps. Like, oh my God, that's not supposed to happen.
Right.
And it still happens. It still happens. It's a daily encounter for a lot of people. It's a daily routine for a lot of people. I completely agree with what you said. There's no need for us to wait for people to catch up and understand and validate or acknowledge. I think, we know that there's something wrong with a lot of systems. Someone made a comment of stop complaining, stop whining about it and do the research. So one of the other comments that I heard, to me, I'm like, there are some studies that are done. And, when it comes to things that are, especially in hierarchical fields like medicine, nobody reports. I think there was a study that I looked at recently that said, I think it was for ortho women surgeons, they've experienced some sort of harassment.
It's not hard to imagine. Yeah.
1.4% reported. 1.4%.
That number is so underwhelming. I can tell you that that's not
1%. Okay. 1% reported it. Why? Because of fear.
Right. Exactly.
These things, we're not talking about, tabulating how many women were nominated for this award or how many women were published in this article. We are talking about vulnerable people in terrible situations where they are usually at the lower end of the totem pole, have zero power whatsoever. Do you think I spoke about any of the things that I went through while I was in training? Not a single word.
Right.
Why? Because of fear.
Right.
Right? There is fear of retaliation and potentially compromising your entire career. Right? When we have evidence that already tells us that these things are not being reported because of fear, why don't we fix these systems that are obviously flawed? No, we tell the people that are victims to say, you go do the research on this. Right? And I think that's one of the things where at first you think, am I the crazy person?
Right.
You always go through this, like, is there something wrong with me, or am I not seeing this right? One of the things that really, like the validation we were talking about, I had so many women come up to me afterwards to tell me how they felt.
At the conference that you were at?
At the conference, yeah, at the conference. They came to me afterwards and they said, thank you for speaking up. Thank you for asking that question. I was looking for an answer to that question as well, and I don't feel like you received an adequate answer. Right? It validated the fact that there are many women in that room that feel exactly the same way as I felt and feel excluded.
Exactly. Yeah. Their voices are not being heard. That's really what it is. Like, for all of the reasons that you listed, they're not, what's that saying? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So if your voice isn't even there, you can have random people push back and say, well, where's the data? I do think research needs to be done in this arena. And I think that could be very valuable.
Yep.
And, it should come from us bonding together and validating each other. That is what we need. Let's talk about Kali. So we are bringing this out into the open, right? These issues that, because of their complexity or because they make certain quarters uncomfortable to discuss, we should definitely bring it to the fore. I think there's a lot of young women that need to hear it, understand their experiences are not isolated. This is not their problem. It's not an issue with them. This is a system issue.
Yep.
So what are some solutions? What are some things that we can do to tackle this? Because for sure, the impetus has to come from us. We have to, like Martin Luther King did, we are the ones who have to, we can't wait for other people to fix this.
There's a Chinese proverb that one of my mentors used to say all the time. And it says, go straight to the heart of danger, for there you will find safety.
Wow. That one's a nice one. Yeah. I have to write that down.
I love that. I mean, that's what we do in trauma, right? You have, dying patients and you go right straight into it and try and figure out and solve the problem. When we talk about these things, unfortunately, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that these things happen day in and day out, right? And I think it's important that we keep bringing it up and keep discussing these things and bring it to the forefront, because it's okay to get uncomfortable for a little bit. That's how we're going to solve these problems.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Things don't change in the comfort zone. That's for sure.
So that's why I think I find it hard to have a conversation, with people about this stuff, because it makes them very uncomfortable. For young women that I mentor, I tell them, one of the beneficial things that I got when I was, pursuing my studies is, even though they may have seemed like discouragement, the forewarning that you will be treated differently, or you will be discriminated against, or you will experience these things, prepared me for it.
It's empowering in a way, when you know your enemies, right? I mean, you know what to expect. You can't be surprised, right?
Right, right. And so I think going in expecting that my treatment was going to be different and that I was going to have to work harder and that there were things that I was just going to have to bite my lip and go through, that was important for me. Hearing all those things, it wasn't, all rainbow and sunshine and everything is going to be great and you're going to do wonderful. And, it wasn't that. I came in knowing that I didn't know the full extent of it, but I came in knowing that there were some obstacles that I was going to hit. So I'm very glad that we have this platform where we can talk about and say, these are the things that are happening. It's not just in medicine. It happens in every field, in every single field. Like, we recently did a survey on our Facebook group
Mm-hmm.
and on another professional Somali network that is, 15,000 people in there.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked a simple question it was from our previous episode on the hijab. Yeah. And we said, what was your experience with the hijab? Because I've had recent mentees who were asked about the hijab. One woman who wore it was asked about it in an interview. Another Muslim woman who didn't wear it was asked. They knew her name sounded like a Muslim name. They said, why don't you wear the hijab? Right? It was damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Damn if you don't. You can't win no matter what.
You can't win no matter what. And the stories that we got and the experiences that were recounted, jobs that were lost, right? Job opportunities, people saying, you know what, I'm not getting any calls back, right? So these are happening all the time. When we know of others' experiences, we can kind of prepare ourselves for it and be in a better situation. And then on top of that, what are your rights?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What are your rights before you go into these interviews? If you're being asked questions that are inappropriate, a lot of people don't know that they're inappropriate. They say, oh, that's their job. They can ask me whatever they want. No, there are employment laws that protect you from being asked those questions.
Right.
And I usually tell them, use that as part of your decision-making tool. If you're in a place where you're looking for a job and that person can't even respect your rights, then do you want to work there?
Yeah. You're right. I like to think of it as the issues are systematic and they're out of our hands. But one of the advantages of living in a country that has a strong judicial system is that you educate yourself with what are your rights in the workplace. You can lend yourself a very powerful voice. It's such an extensive subject that I think we should dedicate an entire episode into like what you can do to protect yourself from workplace discrimination, or what's the recourse? What can you do? There's a lot of options. The number one thing is really take the time to read about, employment laws and civil rights and anti-discrimination laws and find out what is my right and what can you do if anybody is basically trying to take away your rights or violating your rights. And that by itself just gives you so much power. You know what I mean? You're bargaining from a position of power if you're negotiating for a job when you know those things as opposed to when you don't. Sometimes employers don't even realize that they're violating the law.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's a matter of educating them or just letting them know, so they kind of have an idea of who they're dealing with, that this is someone who has power because they know their rights.
Right. And I think one of the things that, we haven't touched upon is, the vulnerability of Muslim women, right? You're very visual, right? Mm-hmm. As far as, Muslims are concerned with how intense Islamophobia has gotten recently, as a hijab wearing Muslim woman, you are very vulnerable. And there are women that are physically attacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just a visible minority. Right. Just, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I think that position also puts you in a place where people feel like they can talk to you however they want. Right. They just come in and there's a difference between people who are curious and ask inquisitive questions versus, people who see you as an easy target. And I think that's one of the things that happens. There's a recent lawsuit going on right now. The young woman who's interviewing at a job and she asked for, instead of like a 2-hour lunch, she requested like 10 minutes for prayer. Mm-hmm. And they basically ridiculed her and told her, we don't do religion here. And now there's a lawsuit. So, people not knowing about this, they're putting themselves and their companies at risk.
Yeah.
At legal risk.
Yeah. And what you're saying is it's validated by the fact that Muslim women, the women are oftentimes the targets of these hate crimes, right? They're the targets of verbal abuse. They really are a vulnerable group. You're right. And, they need that armor. They need that armor, which is, what are my rights? How can I protect myself? If my rights are being violated, what can I do? Who can I talk to? What's my recourse? Yeah, you're right.
It's a lot easier said than done. I know in the medical field, with it being so hierarchical, it becomes very tricky to do that, especially where, in a small world where almost everybody knows everybody. There's a fear that if you do take that route, that you're jeopardizing your career. It comes to, okay, legal recourse may not fix everything. It may fix that one situation or that one department or that one person, but the system still remains intact.
Right.
Yeah,
You got to pick your battles. This is what you're getting at. You can't battle every single time, guns blazing. You have to, pick and choose. And I think you talked about this on an earlier episode, but systematic change, right?
Exactly.
Can and that's why I think affect more than just you? Can it affect other people? I mean, it's such an amazing concept.
Exactly. And that's why I think one of the things that I really like, the fact that we're approaching it from not just, what's happening within our specific field of medicine, but there are Muslim women in all fields.
Right.
And I think we talk to engineers, we talk to pharmacists, we talk to clinical laboratory technicians, we talk to, I think one of the other women was a journalist. I mean, all of them have different experiences in these different fields, but they all come down to there's still persistent explicit bias when it comes to being a woman who chooses or does not choose to wear a hijab. Right? It's a societal thing. It's a systems thing. And that's why I think having a more broader discussion to say, how can we all systematically impact all of our fields instead of like institution by institution?
Right.
How do we systematically influence medicine, influence law, influence the engineering field, all these different fields to say, we need to change how we deal with this specific group of women who feel like they're being constantly or having their rights being violated.
Right. Yeah. Such an important subject for sure. Something that we need to think about and brainstorm about and get out there and push. And we got to be activists because we depend on it. Our sisters, all the Muslim women in this country and abroad depend on it. So,
and I'm sure we'll touch back on this many, many times in more detail.
Yeah, definitely. A great discussion, definitely an important one and not a light discussion. For all of you guys who are listening, if you have a story to tell where your rights may have been violated or you were discriminated against, please send us an email, join our Facebook group, Professional Muslim Women. We'd love to continue the discussion there. Discussions is where research begins, and research is what leads to policy. And so these discussions can really be important. So please join us.
Definitely. There's a lot that's involved with intersectionality. Although implicit bias is huge and the research is ever evolving, we think that for visible minorities such as hijab wearing Muslim women, explicit bias continues to be a huge issue that I think we need to encounter head on. So we've received many stories. We'd love to hear, more stories about your experiences with intersectionality and whether what you've seen as far as implicit and explicit bias is concerned and how you've dealt with it. We can always learn from each other's stories and hopefully keep moving the needle.
Perfect. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode and stay tuned for more important conversations that are directly relevant to us as professional Muslim women.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Thank you for tuning into the Professional Muslim Women podcast, the place for Muslim women to inspire and be inspired.
Please join us on our Facebook group, Professional Muslim Women, to continue the conversation and connect with Muslim women like you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and drop us a like or a review.
We look forward to hearing from you soon.